In a small corner of downtown Sacramento, where local businesses still held their ground against big chain stores, stood Morgan's General Store, a place that had served the community for over 40 years. The worn wooden floors creaked with history, and the shelves were stocked with everything from daily necessities to unique local products. But lately the store had become known for something else, a young employee named Tommy Matthews. Where are you watching from today? Drop a comment below, and let's dive into this incredible story of how a teenager's disrespect led to an unexpected encounter that would change his life forever. Tommy wasn't always this way. At 17, he had once been known for his warm smile and helpful nature. But something changed after his father left last year. The divorce hit him hard, and the store became his outlet for unleashing his built-up anger. Day after day, he would target the elderly customers, mocking them behind their backs and sometimes even to their faces. "Need help finding your reading glasses, Grandpa?" he would sneer, or maybe if you moved a little faster, the line wouldn't be so long. His comments were sharp, deliberate, and increasingly cruel. The store owner, Mr. Morgan, had received numerous complaints, but he kept Tommy on out of loyalty to the boy's mother, who had worked there years ago. One particular Tuesday morning, Tommy was especially harsh to Mrs. Peterson, an 80-year-old regular who had trouble counting her change. "Having trouble with basic math?" he taunted, loud enough for others to hear. "Maybe we should get you one of those kindergarten counting books." Mrs. Peterson's hands trembled as she gathered her purchases and left, tears welling in her eyes. The other employees watched in dismay. Sarah, who had worked at Morgan's for over a decade, shook her head in disappointment. "That boy's heading down a dangerous path," she whispered to another co-worker. "Someone needs to teach him a lesson before it's too late." Little did they know, that lesson was about to walk through their door in the most unexpected way. But Tommy's behavior wasn't just affecting the customers, it was taking a toll on the store's reputation. The once bustling aisles were becoming quieter as loyal customers began taking their business elsewhere. Mr. Morgan had even placed a discreet "for sale" sign in the window, hoping to find a buyer before things got worse. Tommy seemed oblivious to the impact of his actions. He continued his routine of mockery, each day becoming bolder in his disrespect. The morning regulars had learned to avoid his register, preferring to wait in longer lines just to avoid his cutting remarks and disdainful looks. As the sun rose higher in the Sacramento sky that fateful morning, nobody could have predicted that this day would be different. Nobody could have guessed that a Hollywood legend was about to step into Morgan's General Store, or that Tommy's world was about to be turned upside down. The stage was set for an encounter that would not only change Tommy's life, but would serve as a powerful reminder that respect isn't just about how we treat others. It's about who we choose to be when we think nobody important is watching. But before we continue with what happened next, take a moment to think about a time when you witnessed someone being disrespectful to others. What did you do? Share your experience in the comments below, and let's see how it compares to what happened next in our story. The morning light filtered through the dusty windows of Morgan's General Store, casting long shadows across the aisles where Tommy stood, unaware that his life was about to change forever. His smirk was firmly in place, ready for another day of what he considered entertainment, but what others saw as cruelty. Little did he know, fate had something very different in store for him that day, and his encounter with a certain Hollywood legend would teach him a lesson he'd never forget. The morning sun had barely touched the Sacramento skyline when Tommy slouched through the door of Morgan's General Store 15 minutes late as usual. His uniform was wrinkled, his name tag crooked, and his attitude already sour. The clock read 8:15 a.m. Another day of what he considered his personal comedy show was about to begin. "Late again, Tommy?" Sarah called out from behind the register, her voice tinged with frustration. But Tommy just rolled his eyes, making his way to the break room with exaggerated slowness. He could hear the morning regulars already shuffling through the aisles, the perfect audience for his daily performance of disrespect. Mr. Morgan stood by the coffee counter, restocking the cups with trembling hands. The stress of running a failing store had aged him considerably in recent months. "Tommy," he called out, his voice carrying a warning tone, "I need to speak with you about yesterday's complaints." "What about them?" Tommy shot back, pulling on his apron with deliberate carelessness. Mrs. Peterson probably just forgot what actually happened. You know how old people are. Their memories aren't what they used to be. He snickered at his own joke, ignoring the disapproving looks from his co-workers. The morning unfolded like a well-rehearsed play. Tommy took his position at Register 3, the one closest to the entrance, where he could get first picks on who to torment. His first victim of the day was Mr. Harrison, a retired veteran who came in every morning for his newspaper and coffee. "Oh, look, it's the slow walker squad," Tommy muttered loud enough for others to hear as Mr. Harrison made his way to the counter. "Take your time, sir. It's not like some of us have actual lives to live." The other customers shifted uncomfortably, but Tommy was just getting started. Sarah watched from her register as Tommy continued his performance. She'd known him since he was a child, coming into the store with his mother. The divorce had changed him, but this level of disrespect was becoming unbearable. During a quiet moment, she approached him again. "Tommy, you need to stop this," she whispered urgently. "Mr. Morgan can't take many more complaints. The store's already struggling, and your behavior is driving customers away." But Tommy just laughed, dismissing her concerns with a wave of his hand. "Please," he scoffed. "Where else are these old-timers going to go? The big supermarket's too complicated for them. They'll keep coming back, and I'll keep providing the entertainment." His words carried across the store, causing several customers to look up in shock. By mid-morning, 3 more complaints had made their way to Mr. Morgan's office. Tommy had mocked Mrs. Chen's accent when she asked for help finding the international food section, imitated Mr. Peterson's slight limp as he walked away from the register, and loudly commented on Miss Garcia's hearing aid when she asked him to repeat the total. The other employees had started taking longer routes through the aisles to avoid passing by Tommy's register. The tension in the store was palpable, like a rubber band stretched to its breaking point. Even the regular customers were whispering among themselves, sharing concerned glances and disapproving headshakes. "That boy's going to learn the hard way," muttered Joe, the store's longtime janitor, as he mopped up a spill near Tommy's register. "Pride comes before a fall, and his pride's mighty high right now." But Tommy remained oblivious to the warnings, to the disapproving looks, to the damage he was causing. In his mind, he was the star of his own show, and everyone else was just there for his amusement. He had no idea that his biggest performance was about to become his last, or that his audience was about to include someone who would change everything. As the clock approached noon, Mr. Morgan made one last attempt to reason with Tommy. "Son," he said, his voice heavy with concern, "I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. This isn't you. Whatever's eating at you, this isn't the way to deal with it." Tommy's response was a dismissive shrug. "Maybe you just never knew the real me, old man. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got some customers to entertain." He turned away, missing the look of deep disappointment on Mr. Morgan's face. The stage was set, the regular cast of characters was in place, and Tommy was ready for another afternoon of what he considered harmless fun. But as the lunch hour approached, no one in Morgan's general store could have predicted that a Hollywood legend was about to walk through those doors, or that Tommy's perfect little world of mockery was about to come crashing down around him. The bell above the door chimed, signaling the arrival of another customer. Tommy looked up, his usual smirk in place, ready to begin another round of his cruel entertainment. But this customer would be different. This customer would change everything. The bell above the door chimed at precisely 12:34 p.m., and through the entrance walked a tall, lean figure, wearing a simple brown leather jacket and faded jeans. His weathered face was partially hidden beneath a plain baseball cap, but there was something about his presence that commanded attention, even if Tommy failed to notice it. The store wasn't particularly busy at this hour, with most of the lunch crowd yet to arrive. A few regular customers browsed the aisles, and Sarah was busy restocking the bread section. Tommy stood at his register, already sizing up his new target with that familiar glint of mischief in his eyes. The man moved with deliberate steps, taking his time as he examined the store's layout. His posture was straight, almost military-like, despite his apparent age. He picked up a shopping basket and headed toward the canned goods aisle, where the lighting was slightly dimmer due to a burnt-out bulb that Mr. Morgan hadn't gotten around to replacing. Tommy couldn't resist. Here was someone who fit his favorite profile. Older, seemingly well off but dressed casually, and walking with that measured pace that Tommy loved to mock. He left his register, ignoring Sarah's warning glance, and followed the customer into the aisle. "Looking for the soft food section?" Tommy called out, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "We keep the extra mushy stuff for our more seasoned customers." He emphasized the word seasoned with a smirk, waiting for the reaction he usually got: embarrassment, anger, or hurt. But the man didn't respond. He simply continued examining the labels on the canned goods, picking up a can of corn and reading its ingredients with focused attention. This lack of reaction only spurred Tommy on further. "You know," Tommy continued, leaning against the shelf, "we could probably find you one of those magnifying glasses from the pharmacy section. Might help with those tiny letters." He mimicked squinting at an imaginary can, exaggerating the gesture for effect. The man placed the can in his basket and moved to the next aisle, his movements unhurried and deliberate. As he turned, the overhead lights caught his profile for a moment, and Mrs. Chen, who was shopping nearby, gasped softly. But Tommy, caught up in his own performance, missed both the gasp and the significant look that passed between Mrs. Chen and Sarah. "Hey, wait up, partner," Tommy called out, affecting a terrible impression of a Western movie drawl. "You've got to ask yourself one question. Do I feel hungry? Well, do ya, punk?" His awful attempt at one of cinema's most famous lines echoed through the store, causing several customers to stop and stare in disbelief. The man paused for just a moment, and something flickered across his face. Not anger or embarrassment, but something more like quiet assessment. He then continued his shopping, moving toward the dairy section with the same measured pace. Tommy, encouraged by the gathering audience and frustrated by the man's lack of response, decided to up his game. He followed the customer, now openly imitating his walk with exaggerated movements. "This is how you walk when you've seen too many old westerns," he announced to the store at large, drawing a few nervous titters from younger customers. Sarah stepped forward, finally having had enough. "Tommy, that's enough! Get back to your register right now!" But Tommy was too far gone in his performance to heed her warning. "Oh, come on," he shot back. "I'm just helping our customer feel at home. You know, speaking his language." He turned back to the man, who was now examining the expiration dates on milk cartons. "What's the matter, partner? Cat got your tongue? Or maybe you're just trying to remember your lines?" The man selected a carton of milk, placed it carefully in his basket, and turned toward the checkout area. His face remained impassive, but there was something in his bearing that made several customers step back instinctively. Tommy, however, remained oblivious to the subtle shift in the atmosphere. "Let me guess," Tommy continued, following the man toward the registers. "You're doing research for a role. Local man buys groceries. The movie. It'll be a real thriller." He laughed at his own joke, not noticing how the other customers were now actively moving away from him. As the man approached Tommy's register, Mr. Morgan emerged from his office, drawn by the commotion. His face went pale as he caught sight of their customer. But before he could intervene, Tommy had already taken his place behind the register, ready to deliver what he thought would be the finale of his performance. Little did Tommy know the real performance was about to begin, and he wasn't going to be the one directing it. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change not just his day, but his entire life's trajectory. As the man placed his basket on the counter, Tommy's performance reached new heights of disrespect. The store had grown unusually quiet, with other customers and staff watching the scene unfold with a mixture of horror and anticipation. Even the usual background music seemed to have faded into silence. "Well, well," Tommy drawled, picking up the first item with exaggerated slowness. "Let's see what we've got here. Canned corn, a classic choice for those who might have trouble with, shall we say, crunchier options." He scanned the item with a flourish, his voice carrying across the now silent store. The man remained stoic, his weathered face betraying no emotion as Tommy continued his routine. Sarah stood frozen at her register, her hand covering her mouth in dismay. Mr. Morgan had taken a few steps forward but seemed unsure whether to intervene, his eyes wide with recognition and disbelief. "Oh, and what's this?" Tommy held up a package of coffee, examining it with mock seriousness. The regular kind, not the fancy stuff. Trying to relive those old camp coffee days from your Western movies. He paused, waiting for a reaction that didn't come. You know, they make instant coffee now. Might be easier for those shaky hands. A few gasps echoed through the store. Mrs. Chen had stopped pretending to shop and was now openly staring, her basket forgotten at her feet. Even Joe had stopped mopping, his knuckles white around the mop handle as he watched the scene unfold. "Tommy," Sarah tried again, her voice urgent. "Please stop." But Tommy was on a roll now, emboldened by his audience and frustrated by the man's continued silence. "And milk, whole milk no less. Living dangerously, aren't we? Though I guess at your age, cholesterol is the least of your worries, right?" He winked at a group of teenagers who had gathered near the magazine rack, but they didn't laugh. Instead, they looked embarrassed and uncomfortable. The man simply stood there, watching Tommy with an intensity that would have made wiser souls tremble. His eyes, sharp and clear beneath the brim of his cap, never left Tommy's face as the boy continued his performance. "You know what?" Tommy continued, now scanning items with aggressive quickness. "I've got a great idea for your next movie. It's called Grumpy Old Man Goes Shopping. It'll be a real hit with the retirement home crowd." He affected an elderly voice, hunching his shoulders. "Do you feel lucky, Sonny?" "Well, do you? Because these prices are going to make your day." Mr. Morgan had finally found his voice. "Tommy, that's enough." But his warning came too late. Tommy was now fully committed to his act, gesturing wildly as he bagged the groceries. "Or maybe we could call it the good, the bad, and the elderly. Though right now we're just seeing the elderly part, aren't we?" He slapped the bags down on the counter with unnecessary force. The man still hadn't spoken a word, but something had changed in his posture. He stood straighter now, and despite Tommy's height advantage, he suddenly seemed to tower over the counter. The fluorescent lights caught his face at a new angle, throwing his features into sharp relief. Several customers had pulled out their phones, sensing that something momentous was about to happen. The tension in the store had reached a breaking point, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. "Your total comes to $27.84, Tommy announced with exaggerated clarity, practically shouting the numbers. "Would you like me to write that down for you? Maybe an extra large print?" He held out the receipt with a flourish, still doing his poor imitation of a Western drawl. It was at this moment that the man finally moved, reaching into his jacket pocket with deliberate slowness. The motion caused his cap to shift slightly, and for the first time, his full face was visible under the store's harsh lighting. Tommy's smirk began to falter as he caught glimpses of recognition on the faces of those around him. Something was wrong. The atmosphere had shifted from mere discomfort to something else entirely, a mixture of awe and second-hand embarrassment that made the air feel thick and heavy. But before Tommy could process what was happening, before he could understand why Mr. Morgan looked like he wanted to sink into the floor, before he could decipher the strange mix of horror and fascination on his customers' faces, the man finally spoke. His voice was low, gravelly, and unmistakable. A voice that had delivered some of cinema's most memorable lines. A voice that had made countless audiences lean forward in their seats. A voice that was about to deliver the most important line Tommy would ever hear. Clint Eastwood stood motionless at the register, his weathered face revealing nothing as he observed Tommy's antics with the patience of a man who had seen it all. The store remained frozen in anticipation, every eye fixed on the legendary actor as he quietly paid for his groceries, his movements deliberate and measured. But instead of leaving, Eastwood began to walk the aisles of Morgan's general store, his keen eyes taking in every detail. He noticed the worn linoleum floors that had seen better days, the flickering fluorescent light in aisle 3, and the dusty "For Sale" sign partially hidden behind a display of local honey in the window. More importantly, he observed Tommy's interactions with other customers. An elderly woman struggled with a heavy bag of dog food, and Tommy merely watched, smirking as she attempted to lift it herself. A young mother with 3 children asked for help finding baby formula, only to be met with an exaggerated eye roll and a dismissive wave toward aisle 6. Eastwood lingered near the pharmacy section, pretending to examine reading glasses while watching Tommy mock a man with a slight stutter who was trying to ask about cold medicine. The teenager's cruel imitation of the man's speech impediment echoed through the store, causing several customers to leave without making their purchases. Sarah approached Eastwood cautiously, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Eastwood, I'm so sorry about Tommy's behavior. He wasn't always like this. Since his father left—" She trailed off, wringing her hands nervously. Eastwood nodded slightly, acknowledging her words without taking his eyes off Tommy. Mr. Morgan was attempting to handle the mounting tension, moving between aisles with increasing anxiety. His shoulders slumped with each new complaint, each disgusted look from longtime customers, each cruel joke from Tommy that drove another patron away. The weight of his failing business seemed to press down on him visibly. Through it all, Eastwood maintained his silence, watching as Tommy continued his performance, unaware that he was being studied by one of Hollywood's most perceptive directors. The boy's behavior painted a clear picture, not just of a troubled teenager, but of a store in crisis. A group of regular customers had gathered near the coffee station, speaking in hushed tones. "It's such a shame," one elderly woman whispered. "This store used to be the heart of the community. Now look at it." Eastwood's keen ears caught every word, his expression thoughtful as he considered the situation. He noticed the small details that told the store's story: the outdated inventory system, the manual cash registers that belonged to a bygone era, the empty spaces on shelves that should have been full. But he also saw the potential, the prime location, the loyal customer base that persisted despite Tommy's behavior, the community that clearly wanted their local store to succeed. Moving to the window, Eastwood studied the street outside. The neighborhood was changing, but Morgan's General Store still held a prime corner location. Through the dusty glass, he could see the mix of old and new businesses, the flow of foot traffic, the potential that others might have missed. Tommy's voice cut through his observations, the boy now entertaining himself by creating obstacle courses with shopping carts, making it difficult for elderly customers to navigate the aisles. "Watch your step, folks. Don't want anyone breaking a hip." His laughter echoed off the high ceiling, hollow and mean-spirited. Eastwood's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He'd seen this type of behavior before, not just in movies, but in real life. The kid was crying out for guidance, for boundaries, for someone to show him a better way. And the store, this community cornerstone, was crying out for salvation. Making his way back to the front, Eastwood paused to help Mrs. Chen reach a box of tea from a high shelf, earning a grateful smile and a whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Eastwood." He noted how the other customers watched this simple act of kindness, their expressions a mix of appreciation and embarrassment at their own celebrity encounter. The for sale sign caught his eye again. Mr. Morgan had tried to make it discreet, but to Eastwood's experienced eye, it spoke volumes about the store's situation. The price would be reasonable. Desperate times called for desperate measures, and this was clearly a desperate time for Morgan's General Store. As he stood near the entrance, Eastwood could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about teaching a disrespectful teenager a lesson. It was about preserving a piece of community history, about transformation and redemption. Themes he had explored countless times on screen, now playing out in real life. His decision was made. The time for silent observation was over. With the same deliberate pace that had carried him through decades in Hollywood, Eastwood turned toward Mr. Morgan's office. It was time to set in motion a chain of events that would change not just Tommy's life, but the future of Morgan's General Store itself. The bell above the door chimed as another customer left without making a purchase, driven away by Tommy's latest round of mockery. But Eastwood knew that soon, very soon, that same bell would ring with a very different meaning. It would signal not an escape but a return to what this store could be, should be, and would be again. The revelation came like a scene from one of his own movies. Clint Eastwood strode purposefully into Mr. Morgan's office, his presence commanding the room before he'd even spoken a word. Tommy, still at his register, watched with growing confusion as the elderly man he'd been mocking disappeared behind the office door. "Mr. Morgan," Eastwood's distinctive voice carried through the store despite his measured tone, "I noticed your store's for sale." The door had been left slightly ajar, and every ear in the establishment strained to hear the conversation. Tommy's smirk began to falter as he noticed the other customers' knowing looks. Sarah approached Tommy's register, her expression a mix of satisfaction and concern. "Do you have any idea who you've been mocking for the past hour?" she whispered urgently. Tommy shrugged, still trying to maintain his air of indifference, though a seed of unease had begun to take root in his stomach. "Just some old guy trying to act tough," Tommy replied, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. The whispers around the store had grown louder, and he caught fragments of conversations that made his blood run cold. "That's Clint Eastwood. Can't believe that kid. Dirty Harry himself. Make my day." The color drained from Tommy's face as the reality of the situation finally hit him. His hands began to tremble as he recalled every cruel joke, every terrible impression, every mocking comment he'd made. He'd spent the last hour ridiculing one of Hollywood's most legendary figures. Inside the office, Eastwood was speaking with Mr. Morgan about more than just the store's price. "I've been looking for a project," his gravelly voice continued. "Something with real community value. This place has potential." Tommy watched through the office window as Mr. Morgan's expression transformed from worry to disbelief to cautious hope. The older man's hand shook as he pulled out paperwork from his desk drawer, spreading it across the worn surface. "The price is negotiable," Mr. Morgan said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I just want to make sure the store stays true to what it's meant to be. A place for the community." Eastwood nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I'm not interested in changing what works. But some things—" His gaze shifted briefly to Tommy through the window. "Will need to change." The next few minutes passed in a blur of signatures and handshakes. When the office door opened again, Mr. Morgan emerged with tears in his eyes and a smile on his face. Eastwood followed, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the store. His store now. The customers who had gathered to witness this historic moment burst into spontaneous applause. Mrs. Chen wiped tears from her eyes, and even Joe stopped his mopping to join in the celebration. But Tommy stood frozen at his register, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. Eastwood moved through the crowd, accepting handshakes and well wishes with gracious nods, making his way toward Tommy's register. The teenager's legs felt like lead as the Hollywood legend approached, every step bringing him closer to what Tommy was sure would be his final moments of employment. "Young man," Eastwood's voice was quiet but carried the weight of decades of authority, "I believe we need to have a conversation about customer service." The store fell silent, every eye fixed on the unfolding scene. Tommy swallowed hard, his throat dry. I didn't know," he stammered, but Eastwood held up a hand, silencing him. "That's exactly the point," the legendary actor said, his voice carrying across the now silent store. "You never know who someone is, what battles they're fighting, or what impact your words might have. Every person who walks through that door deserves respect, not because of who they might be, but because of who they are." The truth of those words hit Tommy like a physical force. He thought about Mrs. Peterson's trembling hands, Mr. Harrison's dignified silence in the face of mockery, and all the other customers he'd tormented for his own amusement. For the first time he saw his behavior through their eyes, and the reflection shamed him to his core. "I'm sorry," Tommy managed to whisper, his voice cracking. "I'll clean out my locker." But Eastwood wasn't finished. With the same intensity that had captured audiences for decades, he fixed Tommy with a steady gaze. "That's one option," he said slowly. "But I have another in mind, if you're willing to learn." The store held its collective breath, waiting to see what would happen next. In that moment, standing before the man he'd so foolishly mocked, Tommy faced not just the consequences of his actions, but a choice that would define his future. The "For Sale" sign came down from the window, marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. But for Tommy, standing behind his register with burning cheeks and a racing heart, this was more than a change in ownership. It was the moment his life took an unexpected turn, guided by the very man he'd tried to ridicule. 30 minutes later, Tommy found himself seated across from Clint Eastwood in Mr. Morgan's, now Eastwood's, office. The room felt smaller somehow, more intimate, with just the two of them inside. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the dusty blinds, and the distant sounds of the store's regular business created a subtle backdrop to what would become the most important conversation of Tommy's life. "So," Eastwood began, his voice carrying the weight of decades of experience, "tell me about your father." The question caught Tommy off guard. He'd expected anger, a lecture, or immediate dismissal, not this direct probe into his personal life. Tommy shifted uncomfortably in his chair. What's there to tell? He left. End of story. His attempt at defiance felt weak even to his own ears. "Nothing's ever the end of the story, kid," Eastwood replied, leaning back in his chair. "I've been in this business long enough to know that every action has a motivation. Every character has a backstory." He paused, studying Tommy's face. "Even the ones who think they're the villains." The comparison struck a chord. Tommy felt his carefully constructed wall of indifference beginning to crack. He just left. One day he was there, the next he wasn't. Didn't even say goodbye. Just a note saying he needed to find himself or whatever. The bitterness in his voice was raw, unfiltered. Eastwood nodded slowly. "And you figured making others feel small would make you feel bigger?" It wasn't an accusation, just a simple observation, delivered in that distinctive gravelly voice. Tommy started, then stopped. For the first time, he really thought about his behavior. "I guess I just wanted to be in control of something. When people are laughing at others, they're not laughing at you." "Let me tell you a story," Eastwood said, settling into his chair. "Back when I was starting out, I was nobody. Just another wannabe actor trying to make it in Hollywood. Had plenty of people tell me I'd never make it, that I didn't have what it takes." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But you know what I learned?" Tommy shook his head, captivated despite himself. "I learned that respect isn't something you take. It's something you earn. Every role, every interaction, every moment is a chance to build it or destroy it." Eastwood's eyes met Tommy's. "You've been doing a lot of destroying lately." The truth of those words hit Tommy hard. He thought about Mrs. Peterson's trembling hands, Mr. Harrison's dignified silence, all the customers he'd driven away with his cruelty. "I don't know how to fix it," he admitted quietly. "Nobody does at first," Eastwood replied. "That's why we learn. That's why we grow." He leaned forward, his expression intense. "I'm offering you a chance to do both." For the next hour, Eastwood shared stories from his career, not just the triumphs, but the struggles, the moments of doubt, the lessons learned the hard way. He talked about the importance of treating every person with dignity, regardless of their status or situation. "In my films," he explained, "the real heroes aren't the ones with the biggest guns or the loudest voices. They're the ones who stand up for what's right, who treat others with respect, who face their own demons head-on." Tommy listened, really listened, perhaps for the first time in months. Each story, each lesson, chipped away at the armor of anger he'd built around himself. "Here's what I'm proposing," Eastwood finally said. "You keep your job, but with conditions. You'll work every position in this store, from stocking shelves to cleaning bathrooms. You'll learn every customer's name, their story, what brings them here, and most importantly, you'll learn why respect isn't just something you give to people you think are important." "Why?" Tommy asked, genuinely puzzled. "Why give me another chance?" Eastwood's response was measured, thoughtful. "Because sometimes the people who act the toughest are the ones hurting the most. And sometimes the right opportunity at the right moment can change everything." He stood up, signaling the end of their conversation. "The question is, are you ready to take that opportunity?" Tommy stood as well, feeling both humbled and strangely hopeful. "Yes, sir," he said, and for the first time that day his voice carried no trace of sarcasm or mockery. "Good," Eastwood nodded, "because starting tomorrow you're going to learn what real strength looks like, and it has nothing to do with making others feel small." As Tommy turned to leave the office, Eastwood's voice stopped him one last time. "Remember, kid, it's not about who you were yesterday. It's about who you choose to be today." Walking back onto the store floor, Tommy felt different. The weight of his anger was still there, but alongside it was something new, a sense of purpose, of possibility. The customers who had witnessed his earlier behavior watched him warily, but he knew he had a chance to change their perceptions, one interaction at a time. The afternoon sun was setting outside Morgan's general store, casting long shadows across the aisles. But for Tommy, it felt more like a dawn, the beginning of something new, something better. And it had taken a legend of the silver screen to show him the way. The next morning arrived with an air of anticipation at Morgan's general store. Tommy stood before Clint Eastwood in the back office, where the Hollywood legend laid out the terms of his second chance. The early morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting striped shadows across the worn desk between them. "Here's the deal," Eastwood began, his voice carrying its characteristic gravelly tone. "You've got 3 months to prove yourself, not to me, but to every single person you've wronged in this store. Every customer you mocked, every co-worker you disrespected, they're all part of your redemption story." Tommy nodded, his usual swagger replaced by attentive silence. The reality of his situation had fully sunk in overnight, leaving him with a mix of gratitude and apprehension. "First thing we're going to do," Eastwood continued, "is renovate this place. Not just the building, though it needs that too, but the whole attitude. And you're going to be at the center of it all." He stood up, gesturing for Tommy to follow him into the store. They walked the aisles together, Eastwood pointing out areas that needed attention. "You'll start each day at 6 a.m., 2 hours before opening. You'll help Joe with the cleaning, and yes, that includes the bathrooms." He paused, making sure Tommy understood the humility required for the task. "After that, you'll work with Sarah learning the inventory system. She's been here 20 years. She knows every product, every regular customer, every story this store has to tell." Eastwood's eyes met Tommy's. "And you're going to learn them all." The store was beginning to come alive around them, early morning staff arriving to start their day. They all watched curiously as their new owner walked Tommy through his new responsibilities. "But here's the most important part," Eastwood said, stopping near the register where Tommy had performed his cruel routines just yesterday. "Every person you mocked, every customer you drove away, you're going to make it right. Not with empty apologies, but with actions." He pulled out a small notebook and handed it to Tommy. "Keep track of every interaction, every name, every conversation, every opportunity to do better. I want you to understand that behind every face is a story, behind every customer is a life worthy of respect." The magnitude of the task ahead began to dawn on Tommy. This wasn't just about keeping his job, it was about fundamental transformation. "Mr. Eastwood," he started, his voice uncertain, "what if they don't want to give me a second chance? What if it's too late?" Eastwood's response was measured but firm. "That's the risk you take when you burn bridges. Sometimes you have to rebuild them brick by brick, day by day. It's not about instant forgiveness. It's about proving, through consistent actions, that you've changed." He outlined more specific tasks, helping elderly customers with their groceries, learning about their preferences, anticipating their needs. Tommy would need to memorize not just names, but details. Mrs. Peterson's arthritis that made gripping bottles difficult, Mr. Harrison's preference for his newspapers to be bagged a certain way. "And one more thing," Eastwood added, his expression serious. "I want you to understand something about humility. It's not about being weak. It's about being strong enough to put others first." The store was now filling with early morning customers. Tommy could see Mrs. Chen among them, carefully avoiding his register, as she had learned to do. The sight stung with new awareness. "Your choice," Eastwood concluded. "Walk out that door now or stay and learn what real character looks like. But if you stay, you're all in. No halfway measures, no backsliding into old habits." Tommy looked around the store, at Sarah organizing the day's receipts, at Joe mopping the floors with quiet dignity, at the customers who had become targets of his mockery. For the first time, he saw them not as props in his performance, but as people deserving of respect. "I want to stay," he said finally, his voice firm despite his nervousness. "I want to learn. I want to make it right." Eastwood nodded, a slight smile crossing his weathered face. Then let's get to work. Your first task starts now. Help Joe with the morning cleaning. And Tommy? He paused, making sure he had the boys' full attention. Remember, every task, no matter how small, is a chance to show who you really are. As Tommy walked toward the supply closet where Joe kept the cleaning materials, he felt the weight of eyes upon him, staff and customers alike watching to see if this change was real. But for the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about being the center of attention. Instead, his mind was on the notebook in his pocket, ready to be filled with names, stories, and opportunities for redemption. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but with every step, he would have the chance to prove that change was possible. And high above, the morning sun continued to rise over Morgan's general store, casting new light on what promised to be a day of beginnings. The transformation began quietly, like the first light of dawn breaking over the Sacramento skyline. Tommy arrived at Morgan's general store at exactly 6 a.m., finding Joe already there with his mop and bucket. Without a word, he picked up a broom and began sweeping, just as he had every morning for the past 2 weeks. "Morning, Joe," Tommy said softly, meaning it this time. The older janitor nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. They had developed a quiet routine, working in tandem to prepare the store for the day ahead. The notebook Eastwood had given him was already filling up with names and details. "Mrs. Peterson. Arthritis in her hands. Needs help with jar lids and bottle caps. Loves talking about her grandchildren. Mr. Harrison, Vietnam veteran. Prefers his paper folded lengthwise than in thirds. Takes his coffee black." Sarah arrived at 7 a.m., finding Tommy already restocking the bread aisle. "You're getting better at rotating the stock," she observed, noting how he checked each expiration date carefully. "Mrs. Chen will be pleased. She always checks, you know." Tommy nodded, remembering how he used to mock Mrs. Chen's thoroughness. Now he understood it wasn't fussiness. It was care for her customers, many of whom were on fixed incomes and couldn't afford to waste food. The first real test came when Mrs. Peterson walked through the door at 8:30 a.m. Tommy's heart raced as he approached her, remembering the tears he'd caused just weeks ago. "Good morning, Mrs. Peterson. Would you like some help with your shopping today?" She hesitated, years of teaching elementary school having taught her the importance of second chances, but also the need for genuine change. "That would be nice, Tommy," she said finally, her voice gentle but cautious. As they moved through the aisles together, Tommy remembered everything he'd learned about her from his notebook. "I know you mentioned your arthritis has been bothering you more lately. Would you like me to check the labels on these jars for you?" The surprise in her eyes was followed by something softer, the beginning of forgiveness, perhaps. "Yes, thank you. And Tommy? My grandson just made the honor roll, first time ever." Tommy smiled, genuinely interested. "That's wonderful. Which school does he attend?" The conversation flowed naturally as they completed her shopping, and when she left, her steps seemed lighter than before. Eastwood watched these interactions from his office, noting the gradual changes in Tommy's demeanor. The swagger was being replaced by sincerity, the mockery by genuine concern. But the real test came during the afternoon rush. A new customer, clearly frustrated and in a hurry, began berating Sarah over a pricing discrepancy. The old Tommy would have jumped in with a sarcastic comment. Instead, he approached calmly, remembered his training, and addressed the situation with patience. "Sir, I understand your frustration. Let me help resolve this for you." His voice was steady, respectful. He pulled out his phone, quickly calculated the difference, and made the adjustment. The customer left satisfied, and Sarah gave Tommy an appreciative nod. The notebook continued to fill with entries. "Mr. Rodriguez, recovering from hip surgery. Needs help reaching top shelves. Proud grandfather of twins. Miss Thompson, working 2 jobs to pay for college. Always shops during her lunch break. Loves our coffee." Each entry represented not just a customer, but a lesson in humanity. Tommy began to see the store as Eastwood had described it, not just a place of business, but a cornerstone of the community, where lives intersected and stories unfolded. The physical changes to the store were progressing too. Fresh paint brightened the walls, new lighting illuminated the aisles, and updated shelving made products more accessible. But the most significant transformation was happening in the interactions between people. Regular customers who had once avoided Tommy's register now sought him out. They shared their stories, their concerns, their small victories and daily challenges. He learned about their families, their struggles, their dreams, all the things he'd been too self-absorbed to notice before. 1 month into his probation, Tommy stayed late to help Mrs. Chen organize her shopping list for the next day. As they worked, she shared stories about her journey to America, the challenges she'd faced, and her dreams for her children's future. "You know, Tommy," she said, her eyes twinkling, "people can change, like caterpillar becoming butterfly. Takes time, takes work, but beautiful in the end." That evening, as Tommy made his final entry in the notebook, he realized something profound. The task Eastwood had given him wasn't just about keeping his job or making amends. It was about understanding the fundamental truth that every person deserves dignity, respect, and the chance to be seen for who they truly are. As he locked up the store, the setting sun casting long shadows across the newly polished floors, Tommy felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in months. The anger that had driven him to mock others was being replaced by something else: empathy, understanding, and the quiet satisfaction of making a positive difference in others' lives. The transformation wasn't complete, but it was real and ongoing. Each day brought new opportunities to learn, to grow, and to prove that change was possible. And in the quiet moments between customers, Tommy found himself grateful for the second chance that had come from the most unexpected source. A Hollywood legend who saw potential where others might have seen only problems. 2 months into Clint Eastwood's ownership, Morgan's General Store had become almost unrecognizable, not just in its physical appearance, but in its spirit. The once struggling neighborhood fixture had transformed into a thriving community hub, with Tommy playing an increasingly central role in its revival. The morning rush now had a different energy. Regular customers streamed in, greeting Tommy by name as he helped Mrs. Peterson with her shopping cart, or discussed last night's baseball game with Mr. Harrison. The store hummed with conversation and laughter, a far cry from the tense atmosphere of months past. "Tommy," Eastwood called out one morning, "I need you to help train our new employees." The pride in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. 3 new staff members stood nervously by the registers, hired to handle the increasing customer traffic. "First thing you need to know," Tommy began, remembering his own journey, "is that every person who walks through that door has a story. Our job isn't just to ring up their purchases, it's to make them feel valued." He showed them his notebook, now worn and filled with hundreds of entries. "Mr. Rodriguez always comes in at 9 a.m. for his coffee. His hip bothers him on rainy days, so we keep a chair ready. Mrs. Chen checks expiration dates meticulously, not because she's picky, but because she cooks for her grandchildren every Sunday." The new employees watched in amazement as Tommy demonstrated the personal touch that had become the store's trademark. He knew exactly how to bag Mr. Harrison's newspapers, which brands Mrs. Peterson could open easily with her arthritis, and when to have Miss Thompson's lunch order ready during her brief break. Eastwood had made strategic changes too. The store now offered a delivery service for elderly customers, with Tommy often making the deliveries himself. A small coffee corner had been added, creating a space for community members to gather and chat. Local products filled the shelves, supporting neighborhood businesses. The regulars wall, Tommy's idea, displayed photos of longtime customers alongside their stories. Mrs. Peterson's grandson's honor roll certificate hung proudly next to Mr. Rodriguez's twins' birth announcement. The wall had become a testament to the interconnected lives that made up their community. One particularly busy Saturday, a well-dressed woman entered the store, looking somewhat out of place. Tommy approached her with his usual warm greeting, only to discover she was a reporter from the local newspaper, drawn by rumors of the store's remarkable turnaround. "What's the secret?" she asked, notebook in hand. "How did a struggling neighborhood store become such a success?" Tommy glanced at Eastwood, who nodded encouragingly from his usual spot near the coffee corner. "It's not about the products," Tommy explained. "It's about the people. We learned that every interaction matters, that every customer deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. The reporter watched as Tommy excused himself to help an elderly man reach a high shelf, returning to continue their conversation with genuine enthusiasm about the store's community-first approach. The article that appeared the following week captured the essence of the transformation: local store revival, Hollywood legend, and reformed teen create community miracle. But the real miracle, as Tommy knew, wasn't in the headlines. It was in the daily moments of connection and care. Regular customers began bringing their friends and family, proud to show off their store. The coffee corner hosted morning gatherings of retirees, afternoon study groups of local students, and evening meetings of community organizations. The store had become more than a business. It was a living, breathing part of the neighborhood's fabric. Tommy's notebook had evolved into a store-wide system, with all employees now keeping track of customer preferences and needs. What had started as one teenager's journey of redemption had grown into a philosophy that defined the entire operation. "You see that?" Eastwood said one evening as they watched the last customers leave. "That's what community looks like. Not just people buying things, but people caring about each other." The store's financial success was undeniable. Sales had tripled since Eastwood's takeover. But the real measure of success was in the intangibles: the friendships formed, the support system created, the sense of belonging that every customer felt when they walked through the door. Local business owners began seeking advice, hoping to replicate the store's success. Tommy found himself sharing not just business strategies, but lessons about human dignity and the importance of genuine connection. As the sun set on another busy day, Tommy stood at his register, the same one where he had once mocked and belittled customers, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. The store's revival wasn't just about improved sales or updated fixtures. It was about the restoration of human dignity and the power of second chances. Eastwood's gamble on a troubled teenager had paid off in ways neither of them could have imagined. Morgan's General Store had become a model of what was possible when business was built on respect, understanding, and genuine care for others. The transformation was complete, but in many ways, it was just the beginning. Each new day brought opportunities to strengthen connections, build relationships, and prove that success in business could go hand in hand with serving the community. 1 year to the day after Clint Eastwood walked into Morgan's General Store, Tommy stood behind the manager's desk, his desk now, reviewing the monthly reports. The numbers were impressive, but they weren't what brought the smile to his face. It was the stack of customer comment cards, filled with personal messages of gratitude and appreciation. "Remember when you used to mock people from that register?" Sarah asked, bringing him his morning coffee. She'd watched his transformation from the beginning, from troubled teen to respected manager. "Sometimes I still can't believe how far you've come." Tommy nodded, picking up a framed photo from his desk, a picture of him with Eastwood from 6 months ago, when he'd been promoted to manager. "Neither can I. Sometimes I wake up thinking it was all a dream." The store had become a case study in community-based business success. Local business schools sent their students to observe and learn. What they found was more than just a profitable enterprise. They found a blueprint for how commerce and compassion could coexist. Tommy's notebook system had been formalized into a customer relationship program that other stores were now trying to replicate. But as he explained to eager business students, it's not about the system. It's about genuinely caring about people's stories. That morning, as he made his rounds through the store, Tommy stopped to chat with Mrs. Peterson. She was no longer just a customer, but a dear friend. Her grandson, now in college, worked part-time at the store during breaks. "You know," she said, patting his hand, "you've become the young man I always knew you could be." The transformation was evident in every corner of the store. The once dimly lit aisles now gleamed under energy-efficient lighting. The product selection had expanded to include more local and specialty items, carefully chosen based on customer requests and needs. But the most significant change was in the atmosphere, warm, welcoming, and alive with genuine human connection. Mr. Rodriguez, now fully recovered from his hip surgery, led a weekly coffee group for local veterans in the expanded cafe area. Mrs. Chen had started a monthly cooking demonstration series, sharing traditional recipes with eager customers. The store had become more than a place to shop. It was a community center, a gathering place, a home away from home. Tommy's own growth was reflected in his leadership style. New employees received the same kind of mentoring that had changed his life. Every customer has a story, he would tell them during training. Our job is to become part of that story in a positive way. The regulars wall had expanded to cover an entire section of the store, filled with photos, stories, and memories. It told the story not just of individual customers, but of a community growing stronger together. Tommy often found himself standing before it, remembering each person's journey and his own. On this anniversary morning, something special was happening. Eastwood was returning for his monthly visit, but this time with news. Tommy had spent the early hours ensuring everything was perfect, just as he had learned to do over the past year. When Eastwood walked in, the changes were even more apparent to him. The troubled teen he'd taken a chance on had grown into a confident, compassionate leader. The struggling store he'd purchased had become a model of community-centered business. "You've done good, kid," Eastwood said in his characteristic gravelly voice, surveying the bustling store. "Really good." He pulled out a folder from his jacket. "That's why I'm making you a partner in the business." Tommy stared at the documents in shock. "Mr. Eastwood, I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything," Eastwood replied with a slight smile. "Just keep doing what you're doing. You've proven that success isn't just about profits, it's about people." As the news spread through the store, customers and staff gathered to congratulate Tommy. Mrs. Peterson brought cookies she'd baked that morning. Mr. Harrison arrived with a bottle of champagne. Mrs. Chen hugged him with tears in her eyes, murmuring, "Like I said, butterfly." Standing amid the celebration, Tommy thought about the angry, lost teenager he'd been just a year ago. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, of struggle, of having to prove himself again and again. But each challenge had made him stronger, more compassionate, more understanding. The local paper sent a reporter to cover the story of his partnership. When asked about the secret to his success, Tommy's answer was simple. "I learned that every person deserves respect, that every interaction is an opportunity to make someone's day better, and that it's never too late to change." As the day drew to a close, Tommy stood at the front of the store, watching the sunset through the spotless windows. The for sale sign that had once hung there was long gone, replaced by community announcements and photos of store events. Morgan's General Store wasn't just surviving anymore, it was thriving, growing, evolving. "You know what the best part is?" he said to Eastwood as they locked up. "Every day I get to help write new chapters in people's stories, and somehow they've all become part of mine." Eastwood nodded, understanding perfectly. After all, he'd helped write the first chapter of Tommy's transformation. Now he was watching the story continue to unfold, page by page, day by day, one customer at a time. As we conclude this remarkable story of transformation, the scene at Morgan's General Store paints a picture of what's possible when second chances meet determination. The sun sets on another busy day, casting a warm glow through the front windows where Clint Eastwood and Tommy stand, reflecting on the journey that brought them here. "You know," Eastwood says, his voice carrying that familiar gravelly wisdom, "sometimes the greatest stories aren't the ones we tell on screen, but the ones that unfold in real life, day by day." He looks around the store, his investment, yes, but more importantly, a testament to the power of believing in people. The store has become more than either of them could have imagined. It's not just about the profitable business or the renovated space, but about the lives touched and changed. Every aisle holds memories of transformation, not just Tommy's, but the entire community's. Mrs. Peterson approaches them, her warmth evident in her smile. "I remember the day everything changed," she says, sharing a knowing look with Tommy. "Sometimes the hardest moments lead us to the best places." Her words carry the weight of forgiveness and pride in equal measure. The regulars' wall has become a living history of the community. Photos and stories cover its surface, each one representing a connection forged, a bridge built, a life touched. Tommy's notebook, now worn and full, sits in a display case nearby, a reminder of where this journey began. The thing about change, Tommy addresses the gathered crowd, his voice steady with newfound confidence, is that it's never really complete. Every day brings new opportunities to be better, to do better, to serve better. The customers nod in agreement, many of them having witnessed his transformation firsthand. Mr. Harrison, the veteran who once endured Tommy's mockery, now stands proudly beside him. This young man, he says, showed us that it's never too late to rewrite your story. The words carry special meaning coming from someone who had every reason to doubt Tommy's change. Mrs. Chen adds her own wisdom. In my culture, we believe that true change comes from heart, not just actions. Tommy changed from inside out. She gestures around the store at the diverse community gathered together. Now we all family here. Eastwood steps forward, commanding attention without effort. When I walked into this store a year ago, I saw two things, a problem and potential. Most people only saw the problem. He places a hand on Tommy's shoulder. But sometimes the biggest problems hide the greatest opportunities for growth. The gathered crowd listens intently as Eastwood continues. This store isn't just about selling groceries. It's about building connections, fostering community, and believing in second chances. Tommy's story isn't just his anymore. It belongs to all of you. Tommy takes in the faces before him, each one familiar, each one part of his journey. The angry teenager who once stood behind that register, mocking and cruel, seems like a distant memory. In his place stands a young man who learned that true strength lies in lifting others up, not tearing them down. Before we close tonight, Tommy announces, I want to thank each of you. You didn't just give me a second chance. You showed me what community really means. His voice catches slightly with emotion. Every day, you remind me that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves. The story of Morgan's General Store has spread far beyond their small community. It's been featured in business journals, studied in schools, and shared as an example of successful community-centered business. But for those who lived it, it's much more than a case study. It's a testament to the power of transformation. So what's next? Someone calls out from the crowd. Tommy smiles, sharing a look with Eastwood. We keep growing, keep learning, keep serving. This isn't the end of the story, it's just the beginning of a new chapter. As the crowd begins to disperse, Eastwood turns to the camera, breaking the fourth wall for the first time. You know, sometimes the greatest heroes aren't the ones in movies or on TV. They're the ones who face their own flaws, who choose to change, who work every day to be better than they were yesterday. The store grows quiet as the last customers leave. Tommy stands at the door, watching as the community he once mocked, now his family, heads home. The sign above the door catches the last rays of sunlight, casting a warm glow over the words, Morgan's General Store, where community comes first. Remember, Tommy says, looking directly into the camera, every day is a chance to rewrite your story. Every interaction is an opportunity to make a difference, and it's never too late to change. As the sun sets on this chapter of our story, Morgan's General Store stands as a beacon of hope and transformation. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest changes come not from grand gestures or dramatic moments, but from the simple daily choice to be better, to do better, to serve better. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, your own story of transformation might be just beginning. Like and subscribe for more inspiring stories of change and redemption. Drop a comment below sharing your own experience with second chances.